Hey guys, welcome to the Nothing with Nate podcast. So just a couple of new things here. I thought the last videos were very bleak and black and boring, so I got some visuals. Yeah, that's good. One other thing is that my original intent for this video was for me to go on my sister's recently watched on Netflix and review the shows she was talking about, or just watch some of them and talk about them. Looking back on it now, it's kind of boring, but halfway through, my dad comes in and he wants to be, he wants to be in there, wants to be in the mix, and I just start interviewing him, and I think it's way more entertaining than what I was doing. So there's going to be a bit of confusion with that. You'll hear me start talking about Shameless and then directly get cut off by my dad coming into the room. So, just to set the record straight, I was talking about Shameless and how I thought it was trash, and then my dad walks in, and that's where it starts. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked the rest of the video as much as I did, and yeah, enjoy. Next show, Shameless. Shameless should be called White Trash Community. What's going on? Huh?
Why do you gotta slap over your mic?
Because it dampens the noise. Mom, do you want to come in here?
What up?
What's up, Dad? What are you doing?
Mic check 1 2 1 2.
Be careful, the mic stinks.
I said a hip. Why does it smell like feet?
Because it's a sock.
On this mic, bruh.
Bruh, get a nice deep
Why
bruh
does
in there. Bruh.
Why does your mic say Avis Footwear on it?
Avis Footwear? That says Famous Footwear. No, it's AIM-1. AIM-1? AIM-1. A1, I think. Dad, you drink off-brand White Claws.
They're not all brand. Truly is its own brand.
Truly.
Alright, you got a special guest on. What are you trying to say? Alright, so the podcast is Nothing with Nate.
Yeah.
And we've talked about nothing.
Exactly.
So let's have something with Nate.
What do you want to talk about?
What is one question you would like to ask your father that you wouldn't normally question me on?
I question you a lot.
Yeah.
I ask you a lot of questions.
Okay, but now you got a mic in your face. And what would you question me on?
I question both of you every day. Like, I ask you
questions.
2
hands together in pray motion pointing at Nate right now.
Okay, so where did you grow up?
I grew up in Houston. I've moved around a lot.
Did you... I know you mentioned that you were in poverty. You were poverty-stricken. How did that come
The
up?
definition of poverty-stricken.
How did that happen? Like, was it just like...
Because I was broke as shit.
But was it like parents? Did it start as parents?
Yes. It started probably before my parents, but it was my parents that made us grow up in poverty for sure.
What did they do?
A lot.
What caused it? Was it just strictly drugs, or were your parents
Yeah, my parents, I'm sure there was a lot that happened to my parents before. As far as what they went through. And I'm sure what they went through kind of reflected on, or had a lot to do with what, how they raised me and everything else. But yeah, my parents were drug addicts, so that's kind of what influenced my life and how they raised me, and that had everything to do with the poverty I grew up in. Was the their addiction to drugs, and that's what it drove them to do.
Mm-hmm. So you talk a lot about how I dress, like how I roll up my pants sometimes, and then you're like, come on, like don't do that, you'll look poor, or like you'll make comparisons a lot. You're like, oh yeah, I used to wear that in like a kid and I got made fun of, and I know that's to protect me, but some of the things now, like that's happening now, like Champion. I know a lot of people were saying like, oh, when I was a kid, Champion was like gross and like for people that couldn't afford clothes. What are some things that you see now that are really strange to you that back then were like, oh, that would signify that you are poor?
So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, where the grungy thing was not in style. Especially in the 90s, it was all about like how you dressed, how you represented yourself. So you had to have your pants, like your pants, your shirt, everything needed to be ironed, pressed, if possible. You had to look clean. You couldn't look dirty whatsoever. Like there was like a scene in the movie, I don't remember, I think it was a Bronx Tales or something, where it said that even if you're broke and you didn't have money, you had to look like you had money. And that was kind of how I grew up too. I don't know, it was weird. So that's the difference. Now it really don't matter, like especially with suburban kids, which I am proud that I have suburban kids, and I'm able to raise my kids in the suburbs. The more that you don't care so much, the kind of more impressive it is here in the suburbs. Like long hair, kind of grungy look. That would not fly in the neighborhood I grew up with, which is, I guess, neighborhoods, if I could say I grew up in one more over the other, would be like Fifth Ward, Houston, which is ghetto, kind of flashy, even though you're staying in a broke down crack house, you still had to look like you had money. So that was what was different for me.
Let's talk about jobs, because I know you had a lot of strange ones. I remember you telling me one, like you were selling CDs.
Yeah, that was probably my first real job. When I grew up, my dad raised me to make money by any means necessary, because the world was not going to hand you anything. So you sold drugs, you sold women, you sold whatever you had to do to make money. You robbed, steal, whatever. But as I got a little bit older, I didn't want to do any of that, because I didn't want to be anything like my parents or anybody else I grew up with. So my sister Bonnie, she got married to a guy who would sell like cassettes around the ghetto. They would sell like bootleg CDs and that kind of, well, this was before CDs. They would sell bootleg cassettes, and it was all Tejano music. So Texas kind of Spanish country type music. So they would sell these CDs. They would record them off of like kind of like, I guess, like pirating.
Did they do the cassette thing where they would put it in a radio and then wait till like the perfect moment and then?
No, it was, they would probably somebody would buy a cassette from a famous artist, and they would just burn off several copies. It's basically a duplicate copy. So, and they would just do that over and over and over again. They would take original and they burn off several copies on these cassette tapes. And then they would send us out. They would send out groups of people to like poverty-stricken neighborhoods. People who couldn't afford even stuff like $5 tapes of their favorite artists. They'd sell copies of those tapes to people with cheap printouts. People would buy them like crazy because they wanted all these new CDs that are these new cassette tapes with these new artists, like, but they couldn't afford the originals.
Yeah.
So, um,
Did you ever buy any?
I never bought any because I would just listen to the radio. Back then, you could listen to the radio. Everything they played on the radio was whatever you could buy on the tapes, but they just wouldn't play them as often.
Yeah.
So,
Alright, so just back to like you selling them. Did you did that for how long?
not long
Not
at
long.
all.
Really?
Nope.
What would
I
you
did
say?
that for maybe a few days, a week. So I was living in Houston, and my brother-in-law, Joe, he would ride around with his boss and sell cassette tapes all over, not only Houston, but Texas. And so he invited me out to go sell cassettes with him in San Antonio one year. And I did that around Houston for a couple of days, and then I went with him to San Antonio, and they dropped me off in one of the worst neighborhoods in San Antonio. And I was walking around in the wrong colors, in the wrong neighborhood, because back then, that's what mattered, was what you were wearing represented where you were from. From what I do remember is we started off in Houston, and after I kind of proved that I can help sell cassettes in Houston with him, they drove me up to San Antonio. So I was wearing all black, and they dropped me off in a neighborhood where there was a division between people who were all black and people who were all blue. So the people who were all blue were associated with Crips. The people who were all black were associated with Bloods. So I was of course, I was walking around all day in the neighborhood where the all black people were this gang called 8 Ball, and they were associated with Bloods. So I was selling cassettes in this neighborhood where all these people were wearing black, and I was like selling cassettes, making good money and everything. Well, there came a point in the day where I had to kind of cross the street that divided the two and try and, make more money. Well, when I crossed the street, there was people from the opposite gang who confused me for an enemy. And long story short, I ended up getting jumped because they thought I was from the wrong gang. They robbed me for most of my money, and they stomped on all the cassettes I had to sell, and pretty much left me kind of beaten and bloody in the street. And that was kind of it. That was the last time I sold cassettes.
So that was like an actual professional thing.
Yeah, bootleg stuff is a professional thing in the neighborhoods. They call them boosters. So you want a TV that costs $1,500, but you don't have that much because you live in the ghetto. You go find somebody who's stealing all that stuff from the rich.
Yeah.
And you pay half the cost or a third of the cost or whatever it is. It sounds good, but you don't know where that. After a while, you kind of start to get wise to that thing. Like, where does that come from? Like, you got some boosters who steal the property from major chain stores. Like, maybe somebody who works at Best Buy, and they throw a TV or two out the back door at Best Buy, and their friend comes by and picks it up and sells it for a half or a third of the cost. Or your friend who's selling that to you just got through robbing somebody's house, breaking in and causing all this damage. So you really don't know where that property comes from and what's attached to it. If I could go around that, and I could just save up a little bit more money and buy it honestly, then I don't have to worry about it.
All right. So, you obviously had kids. You had me and Michaela. How was that for you? I know you said you immediately started working, but how was it to actually raise kids? Like, how was it to experience me, like a younger me?
So I say constantly that my kids saved my life. I was a knucklehead when I was in Houston before I moved to Alaska, which is a whole different story. Where I met your mom and where you were born.
Yeah.
But I was a hothead. I was on a different path. And had I not had you, I would have probably moved back to Houston and would have probably ended up in trouble. If I wasn't in jail, I would have definitely been dead. And a lot of people hear that and they think of it as like a cliche, but I know for me, it is 100% true because of the family I grew up with. So there was no getting by with me. I was one extreme or the other. Having a kid and being a 20-year-old when I had you was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. What is the best thing that could have happened to me, because it made me look at things like I'm not the only one who exists and I had to take care of somebody else. In my life, taking care of somebody else was better for me. So if it was just about me, I would self-destruct, but having someone else there to raise or take care of it definitely helped me slow down and be a little bit more calculated in my steps.
Was I weirder than the other kids that you grew up with? Like, did I?
Nope.
No?
You were definitely my kid because you were always a people pleaser, which was somewhat who I was too. And you were gentle and considerate of other people, and that's kind of how I was at one point before life hardened me. And I worry about how people look at me. I worry about how I appear to everyone else, and I worry about every little thing that I do before so you don't care about what people see. You don't worry about like things like your appearance so much. You don't worry about the things you say so much. You don't worry about how you come off to other people so much. You worry about having a good time and making sure everybody else is happy around you, and you worry about caring for other people. So that is kind of what I would have been had I not worried about anybody else but me.
All right. So before we wrap this up, is there any funny stories or something I did?
You were constantly bringing humor to the family. So, and you were the lifeline of everything that goes on here as far as like being goofy, being funny, making everybody laugh. Like everything is definitely a lot more serious without you here. The thing that stands up in my mind in church is that you really liked your biological mom's side of the family a lot. And so one time we were in church and you seen your uncle and you screamed his name and you were like, Elias. And everybody in the church went silent and they all looked at you and they were like, what the world was that? Because it was a point in church where everyone was quiet and they were getting ready to pray or something like that. And so you screamed his name and then you like broke out of your mom's arm and you took off running, and you didn't go running in the aisles. You went running in the very front of the church where like in front of the pastor, and you were like, screaming Elias, and then you stopped in the middle of the church and did like a somersault flip, and then you jumped up with your hands, and then you ran to him and you jumped in his arms, and that was like the funniest thing I could remember.
Oh my god, that's embarrassing. In front of the whole church? Did I sit with him the whole time?
No, not really.
No.
You just went over to say hi, and then you came back to us. So that was a funny thing.
Alright. Well, thanks for being on, Dad.
All right. Peace.
Alright. Peace. Alright, guys. That's gonna be it for today. Thank you for listening, and comment your favorite flavor ice cream, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright. See you guys.
Yeah.